Hey, welcome to the channel. I took this 40-year-old wood mizer manual sawmill and turned it into a fully hydraulic brand new sawmill. I then began using that mill to saw lumber to build a sawmill shed. Now that I've got the building built, I've began milling lumber inside the building. The clip that you're watching is some of the things that you can see on my channel. If this is the kind of thing that interests you, please like and subscribe. Today on the sawmill we got a little loblolly pine. It's 18-inch on both ends. It's 10 foot long. We're going to be cutting some board and batten siding out of it. This is a pretty low quality log. I've chosen it specifically for this siding. I wouldn't want to try to make this log into structural lumber, but nice wide boards. I think the knots will balance out and be just fine. I am orienting the log specifically to the knots and the faces of the finished lumber when we get done. So this first slab I'm taking off, I'm trying to get deep enough into the log to get a opening face of about 6 inches wide, so that I can cut a 5/8 thick board next that will actually be the batten strips. So what I'm cutting is actually a small order for a customer that needs some replacement siding on a house. So my job is to make siding that matches the house. So the requirements are that the batten strips are 5/8 by 2 inches and the boards are 7 3/4 by a full 1 inch thick. This old pine log, I don't know if you can tell in the video, but it has a cluster of knots at about 6 foot from the operator, and then just about 9 foot from the operator there's a cluster of knots that goes all the way around the log. So there's not a wonderful face on it. And the knots that it does have, some of them are pretty large. So I've oriented this log to where when I get to my face I'm going to start cutting boards off of, it'll have a pretty good distribution of knots in the pine boards. Of course, you can see here in the video that on the one on the operator end I've got a pretty significant open face there, but on the non-operator end it's only about 6 inches wide. On the sawmill today I'm using a wood mizer silver tip 10-degree blade. I'm using pine sol and dish liquid in the lube tank. Sawing pine logs is a little tricky until you get used to it. They're very sappy. The sap builds up on the blade if you don't run enough lube or anything in the water to cut the sap off the blade. The wood itself is pretty soft, but the knots are hard. If you'll notice, as I approach this cluster of knots right here, I actually slow the mill down quite a bit to give the blade time to cut the material instead of pushing it through it, so that the blade tracking stays accurate. Not all of the time, but some of the time, if you don't do that, the blade will dive after them knots. We just got the slab off of this face, and I'm dropping down 5/8 of an inch to cut a fletch cut that'll be trimmed into some of the battens. I have to say, I think this is the thinnest boards that I've ever intentionally cut. I've trimmed a lot of really thin pieces off that were going to be waste cuts, but this is 5/8 thick and it's a keeper. Now that we've got this fletch cut off, we're going to turn it to the final face on the log. as it turns, you can see the knot distribution. They're all fairly small on that side. So we're going to take a slab off of this side, and then we'll take another fletch cut that's only 5/8 thick off of it, and we may have to take a couple of those, but once we get it squared up, then we can start taking boards off. There again, as you can notice, if you really pay attention, as I approach this knot cluster, starting about right now, I drop the speed to about 50%, and then as soon as I'm clear of the knots, I pick the speed right back up again. With my old manual mill, you could feel those knots when you were getting into them, and you knew to just back off on the amount of pressure that you were exerting on the mill. This one, with the power feed, it's not like that. You just have to pay attention to where the knots actually are visually. Here we're cutting another one of those 5/8 thick fletch cuts that's going to be turned into batten strips when we mill these down at the end. So we won't have enough of these batten strips out of these fletch cuts when we get done. My plan is to save enough of this cant into a smaller cant that is going to be 2 inches wide that I can cut several of these batten strips from. Okay, now we have this cant down to about 12.5 inches square, I believe, at this point. So this was an 18-inch log to start with. So this log was 18 inches on both ends, but the only reason that it was really 18 inches on the top end was because of the knot cluster just before you get to the end of the log. Between the two knot clusters was a fair bit smaller than the 18 inches, but if we figure from the 18, if you multiply the 18 times 0.7, you only get 12.5 inches. So that's the best you could hope for to get a nice square cant size out of an 18-inch logs. Given this information, I knew that we were going to have issues getting a nice squared up 12 by 12 cant out of this log. But what I really need from this log are 8 1 by 7 3/4 and 1 2 by something that I can cut the batten strips from. So we already have the log oriented with the face that I want to cut from facing up, and it is already over 8 inches wide. So I just leave it where it is and begin sawing down toward the deck, sawing the full 1 inch thick boards that I'm after. And of course, as you can see, I am sawing multiple boards without off-bearing any. I'm just trying to get these 8 boards sawed out. You can't tell it, but it's about to get dark. So now I'm cut down to about the pith on the log. Of course, the center is what I'm talking about, the heart. If I were cutting anything thicker than a 1 by, I would really be focused on trying to get that captured in one board rather than taking a chance on having it on the side of a board and that causing the board to warp as the lumber dries. With this log having so many knot clusters in it, the pith is bound to wander some, so it would strictly be a crapshoot. You won't know exactly where that pith is until you cut it open to find out. What I am going to do is make sure that it is balanced left and right as the boards are laying on the mill now, so that as they dry they won't crook left or right. So what I could have done would have been to have flipped this cant 90 degrees, cut it down to the 7 3/4 that I need for the boards, and of course I would have had to have cut material off of both sides to have kept the pith balanced. Then flipped it back and began cutting boards, and of course still I probably would have had one on either side that would have needed to been treated like a fletch and edged up later. When trying to cut a big cant out of pine, especially with large knot clusters, you never really know what it's going to do until you start in cutting it. And if you was to start taking a 2-inch side piece off of this and it caused the entire cant that's left to crook, then you'd just be stuck because you've already narrowed it down to the 7 3/4 we need to make the boards. So what I'm electing to do is cut each board the full 12 and change that the cant is wide at this point into the 1-bys. So after I get all 8 of those cut that I need, I'm going to flip them all up on the mill and begin cutting down from the top. And now what I'm going to actually do is cut stickers, because I'm kind of low on stickers anyway. So these are already cut 1-by, so I'm going to be cutting 1-by-1s. And if I start cutting down and the whole cant starts to crook on me, I'm going to flip them all over and start cutting some off of the other edge to keep it balanced so it stops crooking. So as you can see, it was a little bit tricky to get all these flipped from laying flat to vertical and clamped up, so that we can begin cutting 1-by-1s off of the top coming down. What we're trying to do is keep the pith in the center and produce 7 3/4 inch wide boards. You probably can't tell in the video, but I have a cant still in this that's on the operator side that's a little over 2 inches thick, and of course the 12 and change tall, and it has some bark on it, so it actually needs edged up anyway. So I'm just leaving it in there for now, even though it won't work out for stickers. Like I say, it needs edged up, so I'm going to leave it in there for now and let it get trimmed up, and eventually I'll pull it out of there. People make stickers out of all different kinds of wood, I suppose. I have some out of oak, I have some out of pine. I guess I probably have the most out of pine, just because it's a cheap wood. Logs are fairly prevalent to me. I always cut mine at 1 inch in one of the directions. I try to get it to all be close to 1-by-1, but if I'm cutting 1.125 or 1.25 inches, I can cut them by 1 in the other direction and use those. Or if I'm cutting all the way down to 7/8, I can use 7/8 by 1 inch. When they're dry, you can look at them on the ends and or by feel and tell which way they should be flipped as you're using them. Right now I'm just throwing them on the ground to get them out of the way. Later on I'll sort through them and cull the ones that won't make 50 inches is what I like to cut mine to, and of course they'll need to be dried down at least 10% moisture content before they're used. That's one benefit to using pine though, is they don't take very long to dry by comparison to oak. So you can see that I was able to cut 2 1-inch strips off of this side of all the boards without the boards themselves crooking on the mill. So that's about all I need to take off of this side as far as balancing with the pith. So I'm going to flip them all over, and I give it a pretty good bit of thought as I was doing this, and I just couldn't come up with a way to get the hydraulics on the mill to do anything for me. as far as flipping these from one edge to the other. If anybody has a hydraulic mill and has a suggestion on how to do that, I would love to have some comments on it. Of course, as you can see, I just pulled that 2-inch, or it's actually a little over 2-inch thick cant out of there now that I've got all those flipped. And now I'm going to cut some more stickers off of this side. So you can kind of tell now I'm beginning to lose a little light in the mill shed. It's not nearly as dark outside, but it's starting to dim down pretty significant inside the building. I don't have any electricity in the building, so I don't have any lights in the building. By the time I get through sorting these stickers and only using the ones that have 4 square corners, I probably won't have but about half of what I'm throwing in the floor here. Between the knots and weighing, I don't want any weighing on my stickers, because I don't want the possibility of carrying bugs from pine beetles and whatnot from the bark on the stickers into the fresh new wood. This is the final cut to bring these 1 by 7 3/4 down to size, and it's not going to make a full 1 inch. It's only about 1/2 inch, but it has to come off of there. I was able to finish cutting this board and batten up before I lost light, but not before the camera lost light to where the quality of the picture went really downhill. So I've edited out the entire portion of where I got the battens out of the flitches, which I don't think I got but 4 out of the flitches, and then I cut several out of the little cant. I pull these off of the mill one at a time so that you can get a pretty good look at the knot arrangement and where the pith ends up in all of the boards and everything. If you look closely, you can see that the pith kind of wanders around through the 4th and 5th board as I pull them off of here. You can see though that it is pretty centered top to bottom in those boards. This may seem a little confusing. I've pulled them all off, and then the next thing you see is I'm all back on the mill, but I had to pull them off to finish cutting everything up, and now I've put them back on the mill just so I got a place to spread them out where you can see what we've got accomplished. That one on the left isn't crooked, it's just not pushed up tight to the others. I don't know why. I guess it hung on the bottom one and didn't get scooted over where they're nice and tight together. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel. It doesn't cost you anything. It only benefits me. Here I've thrown the battens on top of the boards like it would be on the house, so that somebody that's not familiar with board and batten siding can have a look at what it should look like.